Welcome to the Creative Writers Integral Support Pod. I'm so excited. We have Dr. Jane Simmons going over paradox, polarities. It's going to be a great session today. And if you haven't bought your early bird tickets, you better buy them now. Look for the link in the description to go to the Embodied event April 3rd through 5th in Boulder, Colorado. And now over to Jane.
Right. Well,
Thank you,
it's
Beth.
wonderful to be with you all. I'm really looking forward to tonight's session. And I want to begin by just doing a little bit of brain gym. If you have ever heard of brain gym, it's just movements you can do with the body that are designed to kind of harmonize the left and right hemisphere. And the majority of these movements are done standing up, moving, but there is one we can all do sitting down that I just want to start with. And it goes like this. We put our thumb up like this, and we're going to make it into an infinity sign, but we're going to watch our thumb. We're going to follow the thumb back and forth with our eyes as we go back and forth. And we're going across the body each time as we do this. Okay, now we're going to switch hands and do the very same thing. Do the infinity sign and follow the thumb with your eyes. And then finally, we're going to do both together. Same thing. Follow those thumbs as they go round and round, infinity. All right, and so let's just take a moment now and just settle into our seats and release all the activity of the day, anything that's keeping us from being present. I'm actually going to turn off my camera so that I don't use up the bandwidth here, and it could interfere with my slides. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Because this is what we're talking about, embracing paradox and working with polarity in our creative writing. And one of the hallmarks of integral thinking, we've done our brain gym, and sort of second tier consciousness, if you will, whatever wording you want to use for this, one of the hallmarks of it is the ability to communicate with anyone on the spiral, no matter where they are, with anyone with different values, different worldviews than we might have, that when we get to this integral stage of our development, we're able to communicate. We may not necessarily agree with everything, but we can cultivate the capacity to understand and to speak to their value systems, have a conversation with another person who may have different ones than we do. And what we're talking about here is a higher order of communication skills. This is an integral skill set. And we're talking about polarity thinking, which is the ability to build our capacity to see both and in the situations, to see the value, the benefits of seemingly contrasting issues. And I think of polarity thinking as being very similar to the balance that comes as we're riding a bicycle. It's an ongoing movement. You have to continue steering, moving your body side to side as you're going along in order to achieve and maintain balance. And if you stop what you're doing, you're going to tip over. So it's working with two sides of an issue in such a way that you leverage the good from the upside of each one, tapping into the genius of it, as the polarity teacher Barry Johnson calls it, while managing the tyranny, as he puts it, of the downside. And I want to give you an example here of a polarity management moment where we're working with two things that we want both of these things in our lives, right? They both have a place. One is activity, one is rest. And the first thing we want to do is look at what is the upside of each of these activities. So If you look at activity, our mind stays sharp, our body toned, we're stimulated, we're challenged. But what's the downside if we overfocus, if we overfunction on the activity side? We get overloaded and exhausted and burned out. I don't know if how many of you might recognize this phenomenon in your own life, but I often find myself on the downside of the activity part of the polarity. So then we look at the rest side. What's the upside of being balanced in our rest? Our thoughts integrate, we're rejuvenated, we're relaxed, we're refreshed. The downside, if that's all we do, is, the mind is dulled, we're out of shape, we're bored, we're unstimulated. And so if we are, this is how we can tell if we're over functioning in one and under functioning in the other, is that we move to the downside. And there's a whole activity around this that you would now look at authentic actions you can take in each side of this polarity. I'm not going to really get into all of that. If you're interested in this, you want to get Barry Johnson's book on polarity management because he goes right into detail about how to manage these various polarities that we want both in our life and to find a way to leverage the upside of each one. And it's a real skill to start looking at the polarities in life because we have a lot of them, it seems. If you look at the polarization that's going on in our country right now, we want to be mindful of how to deal with polarities. So in polarity thinking, and is the very important word, as Father Richard Rohr, who is the founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation, says the most important word in that whole title is and. It's action and contemplation. Um, and so we want to incorporate this. So for example, in polarity thinking, we don't ask, are we going to honor tradition that this is the way it's always been done? Or are we going to change the way we do things? No, the question becomes, how can we both honor tradition and change the way we do things? That's polarity thinking. And when we get to that perspective, it can lead to a shift in how we view the whole thing and in order to encompass both. In the book Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, he's the president of Pixar. It's a really good book where he talks about how Pixar came about and what they did, but it's all about creativity. And he says, in order for creativity to flow, and those of us that are writing, we want to be paying attention to this, we have to have our feet in two camps. We need to navigate the known and the unknown. With one foot in the world of what we already know to have been successful in the past, but the other firmly on the side of unrealized possibility. And when it comes to any creative endeavor, it's so easy to stay focused on the known part of the equation. What is safe? What's worked in the past? Let's do more of that. While we might completely avoid the universe of the unknown in writers' arena, it's the terror of the blank page. And one thing that he learned from Pixar's amazing success was what happens when we primarily focus on the known. It can be a death knell for any kind of creative venture. And he learned this the hard way. Toy Story was such a phenomenal success that the assumption was that Toy Story 2 was destined to be more of the same. And so they were working on the sequel. And when they screened the almost finished product, Pixar ended up throwing the entire thing out and starting all over again. Years of work deleted. But because they had created a culture at Pixar that welcomed mistakes, welcomed failure, starting over ended up being the pathway to making Toy Story 2 as phenomenal as the first. And they realized they could not just do more of the same of what they had in the past and expect that to be successful. I remember hearing a musician being interviewed once, and he said, you have your whole life to record your first album. You have 18 months for the second one. And the same thing can be said of authors. We have our whole life to publish our first book, but the second one? And this is where it can be very tempting to do more of what worked the first time around. So this is a very important aspect of us when it comes to embracing paradox, working with polarity as writers. We want to bridge the two worlds by embracing both the known and the unknown, and recognizing their interdependence as polarities. This is kind of the first aspect of it that we want to be really aware of. But Catmull talks about another important polarity that affects the creativity of Pixar's programs the most, and it's namely art and technology. Now they're animators, and they're looking at computer technology as well as the artisans that they are. But he says something very intriguing here, and I think he's really hit upon why this works so amazingly when we start to integrate polarities. He says this: when you integrate both poles, the two will drive each other to create what emerges. So can you feel what that's, where that's leading us? That when we're doing this integration work, we are now giving those two poles the energy they need in order to do the work of emergence. When we're able to integrate the upsides of the two, it creates an energy that wasn't there before. That energy brings forth something new. We're not imposing a pattern on this. We're allowing that pattern to emerge. And this is what I find so exciting about this, is that we're working with energies that, that we haven't seen before, we haven't used before, at least knowingly. When we're consciously doing this work, we're unleashing something that can now bring forth something that we hadn't seen before. And so it involves being able to envision the antithesis to each thesis that is developed, uniting the contraries into a more comprehensive synthesis, and seeing in all opposition the possibility of a deeper complementarity that is already there. And that synthesis is a higher level of what originally appeared to be just two things in opposition. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so we need to learn to stretch our minds to encompass thesis, antithesis, synthesis, moving beyond and transcending those opposites, finding the field of possibility that lies beyond the duality. Finding that field of possibility that lies beyond the duality, and that takes a shift in perspective. Now, you may have seen this before, where this is looking like it's several rectangles, rows of rectangles, but there's actually some circles in this picture as well. And if any of you are maybe having trouble locating them, I've drawn some circles around the circles. So if you take a look at this and see, can you see the rectangles?
Mm,
And can you see the circles?
yeah.
And
Yes.
you see
Wow.
how we shift our perspective. And I'm just going to go to another slide that doesn't have those circles done. So I'm going to ask us all now just to do a little moment of seeing the rectangles. So let's all just kind of see those rectangles in the rows. And now shift to seeing just the circles.
Yeah, at this point, the circles pop out, and what were the rectangles are just straight lines.
Exactly. Yes. And you can see there's a shift in our perspective. It's like an ocular change that we make that helps it to stand out. But once we've seen it, it's there. We can
Mm-hmm.
keep watching. And so there's an activity you can do where you see the rectangles and then you see the circles. Now the rectangles, now the circles, and then try and see both at once. And this is a skill set that needs lots of practice, but it is it's the way we can widen our viewpoint. And when we learn to do that, we start to see in a more integral way. And so by trying to see both at once, we're creating some cognitive dissonance, and when the intellect kind of gets in the state of discord, discomfort, something greater can emerge because the mind is kind of at a quandary here. it loses its stickiness. We get pulled out of predict and control default thinking, and then our job is to stay with the discomfort long enough to allow a higher order of thinking to surface. So by doing this, try and see both at once, staying with that discomfort, just on the edge of it. The mind kind of scratches its head and says, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. Um, and and that can help us to move out of the presumptive, what's the word I'm looking, like that, the preconceived idea that the mind has. Byron Katie, you see her here, she's done some excellent work that helps to unstick the mind from the viewpoint that this is how it is, this is the only truth, right? I'm judging this person and that's who they are. But she has a very unique way of working with someone who is stuck in a judgmental viewpoint about another person and won't let go of it. And so she invites them to go ahead and judge that person to their heart's content. Lay it all out, write it all out, let the egoic mind revel in judging, negating, opposing, doing whatever. And after the person would exhaust all the negative characterization, Katie would choose one of the judgments, like, for instance, well, she's mean-spirited, this person would say. And she would say, give me an example of how the opposite is true. Now, the person would be caught so off guard listening to her say that, because what they're expecting to hear is, give me an example of her mean-spiritedness. But then, give me an example of how the opposite is true. Well, this causes that cognitive dissonance. The mind doesn't know what to do when presented with two opposing things at the same time, kind of like what happens when you see the word green, but the letters are blue, and so here's the thing. I know how to enroll others into my negative characterization of someone else. I know how to share my evidence of what's wrong with this person. I can just fill you right in on that. And yet, don't ask me to find the opposite. But that is like, that's not my skill set. I can tell you this characterization really well, but to find the opposite, that's harder. And yet the people she works with in this way, they can find it. Reluctantly, begrudgingly maybe, but like, okay, well, she's kind to her dog, I'll give her that. So when we have two opposing views being acknowledged and integrated, now it helps to create a third perspective. Like sometimes people act in a mean way, and sometimes they act in a kind way. And overarching all of that third perspective is compassion, because we begin to relate to them. There are days I've been both. I can find it. I can find it when I've done that. And now self-compassion can help me to embrace my own meanness, what I have been judging someone else about, along with my own kindness, and I will stop exiling the part I don't want to see. I will stop projecting it onto others. And this is a very important step in cultivating polarity thinking that we often might miss. And that is recognizing that unless all the parts of me that have been repressed, ignored, shunned, exiled are embraced with welcome, acceptance, kindness, forgiveness, mercy, I will not be able to experience the wholeness of the union of opposites, because it's going to get in the way of me experiencing any kind of a wholeness mindset. I will continue to project my exiled meanness onto someone else. They're the meanie over there. I'll keep them at arm's length. So in order for me to reach a non-dual perspective, it entails embracing my own shadow material. And here's the cleanup part of the transformative wake up, grow up, clean up, show up work that we're doing. And when we're doing this, we're applying non-duality to life. We're realizing there's an overarching unitary reality that is bringing everything together and in this embracing of difference and contradiction. And we start to see different viewpoints are additive, they're not competitive. Opposing views can contain complementary truths when they are viewed from this higher level of awareness. And contradictions can become opportunities for deeper comprehension and healing. So it's really important for us to get that part of polarity thinking involves getting our own polarization within us integrated. And that sets the stage for us to be able to see life in its wholeness rather than in our projections. So, writing about paradox, let's think about that for a minute. As a unity minister for over 25 years, I realized early on in my ministry that my job every week was to define the undefinable. It was to describe the indescribable, was to talk about something that couldn't be conveyed in words. You know, the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. And every single week I was writing about paradox, but I realized early on the power of metaphor, using metaphor in writing my talks. And of course, I'm not the first one to do so. You know, the kingdom of God is like leaven, or the, faith as a mustard seed. This has been around for a while. Now, unity teaches scripture metaphorically, metaphysically. So there's a David inside every one of us overcoming our own internal Goliaths, for instance. And so there's a lot of use of metaphor in trying to describe spiritual principle. But I used to do a children's moment at the end of the service, and it would range from telling a story or having an object lesson or asking questions. It was a variety of things. One day, I had a sponge and a bowl of water. And the lesson was something like how the power of love and gratitude can make our hearts grow bigger. Kind of like the Grinch, growing 3 times its size. And so I showed them I had a little scrunched up sponge. I said something like, the more love and gratitude you feel, I put the thing in the water, the more your heart opens to feel more of it, and the sponge grew and grew. And I watched one little 6-year-old girl get it, totally get the metaphor. I watched her eyes pop open, her mouth drop open. She was amazed, and she really understood that feeling love makes your heart grow bigger. In fact, the next week, her mother came up to me before service and said, all I heard about all week was the sponge, and love and the sponge. But that little girl's aha moment, it is seared into my memory. And I really saw the value of the metaphor. That little girl is probably now in her 30s with kids of her own. And I'd love to see her again and ask her if she remembers the sponge. I think it was a turning point in her little life. But interestingly, metaphors have a paradoxical power, because a metaphor distances an experience by equating it with something else, but by doing that, it brings the experience closer to us. It's a way to translate insight into action. And why is this important for us as writers? Because here's the thing, our writing is destined for another human heart. But no matter what we write about, we are writing in such a way that another human being will receive this. And so metaphor can be a wonderful tool for us to deliver that to. It helps people to relate to whatever it is we're writing about. But something I didn't know before, Picasso once declared, I make reality visible because I use metaphor. That's what he said. Now, he was referring to his experience of creating this 1950 sculpture called She-Goat from a heap of rubbish. He was using discarded ceramic fragments, metal shards, wicker baskets that he scavenged from an artisan junkyard. And different parts became udders and ribs. And he said, I follow the way back from the basket to the rib cage, from metaphor to reality. And so you can see the rib cage on the sculpture, knowing that it is part of a basket. But he follows the metaphor back to reality, which I found really interesting. And it takes a different perspective in order to see that, in order to get beyond the barriers of the logical mind's preconceived ideas, what Deepak Chopra calls premature cognitive commitment, and be able to shift into whole brain vision. Did someone say something? I didn't want to cut you off there. No? Okay. And to shift into a wholeness mindset, which is so important for art in any form, of course, or for any creative venture. Perspective, shifting perspective is what it's all about. Perspective is what art class is about. It's not about teaching people to draw. It's about teaching people how to see. So maybe in art class, we'll draw a chair, but we'll draw it upside down. Or maybe we're asked to draw the space around the chair. The point is, we want to mute the left brain's immediate presumptive knowingness. We want to create a little cognitive dissonance when writing about paradox. Now, it's not to say that the logical mind doesn't have a say at all, but to reach a wholeness mindset, we need to first quiet the noisy static within and listen to the intuition and the imagination, and then we invite the editing and the evaluation back into the process when we're ready on our own terms. I read recently there's nothing quite as effective when it comes to shutting down alternative viewpoints as being convinced you're right. So we're going here for a sense of spaciousness, the field beyond duality, beyond right and wrong, as Rumi reminds us. We're going for that field beyond duality. So I want to take us through another exercise that can give us, again, another inkling of what it takes to embrace paradox. So wherever you're sitting, can you locate a wall that you would call the wall that's in front of you? You can see there's a wall in front of you, and then there's a wall behind you. And I'm going to ask you to do the rest of this exercise with your eyes closed. So with your eyes closed, I want you to move your attention to the front of the room, to the wall that is the front of the room. We're not looking at the wall, we're sensing it. We're focusing our attention towards it. Okay, and I'll just take a minute to try to get into that space. Focus your attention on the wall in front of you. Okay, and now without moving your head, without changing your position, with keeping your eyes closed, move your attention to the back wall of the room you're in. Now focus your attention on the front. And the back. And now both at once, front and back. Notice how it feels to situate yourself in the room, focusing at front and back. Okay, so we want to come back now, open our eyes. And I've just got a little bit more to talk about, and then I want to hear what your experience was of doing this. But here's what I want to say about it. As we widen our viewpoint, as we practice shifting our perspectives, we can learn to transcend polarization, embrace paradox, encompass both and thinking. And we start to see things as yin and yang rather than a pendulum. And this ability to be in the midst of paradox and not run from it is a definite skill set of an integral writer, integral leader, learning to make room in our understanding to allow both concepts to co-arise, to coexist, is the essence of embracing paradox. So we're talking about paradoxes such as being and becoming. We are already being the truth of who we are, but we're becoming it at the same time. We're evolving into who we already are. Everything already exists as potentiality while it's becoming manifested. So it's the actual and the potential, the emergent and the ever-present. And then there's the paradox of the individuality and interbeingness. We are one with all that is. We are distinctive within that oneness. One with all that is, distinctive within that oneness. So we can find a distinct feeling of our uniqueness while floating in an infinite sea of love, of oneness, however you experience that. Feeling our own aliveness being connected to and nestled in life itself. And this idea of being nested is a metaphoric way to describe the indescribable, of having your aliveness being nestled in life. And so order and disorder paradox. In order to deal with the order and disorder, we need to surrender the love of certainty for the love of surprise. And then here's a great one for writers: procrastination and incubation. And when does one get out of balance? Now, Gebser says something interesting that I found helpful in understanding some of this. He says, every one of us today is in his or her own way, wherever we may be, not only a witness, but an instrument of what is to be reality. Hence the necessity for us to create the means from which we ourselves can jointly shape this new reality. And we do that by practicing coming from a non-dual wholeness perspective, being both the witness and the instrument of transformation. Can you feel the difference there? Shifting into witness mode, shifting into instrument mode. So as we're looking at this, one thing I find really helpful is to read other authors who have had a non-dual experience of some kind and just see how they write. Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, as I already mentioned. Another is Michael Brown, the author of The Presence Process. And one that I was surprised to find writing this way was David Hawkins. Now, if you remember his book, Power versus Force, my husband and I read that book. We loved it. Then I bought another book by him called The Eye of the I. And the more I read of this book, the weirder it felt to me. And I was reading it out loud. We were on a road trip, and I said, there is something odd about this book. I don't know what it is. It just feels so strange. Finally, I clued in. He never uses the pronoun I in his writing of this book. He does use we from time to time, but never I. And at the time, this was in the early 2000s, it just felt weird to read. Now it's anything but weird because I'm hearing it from a different altitude, and I realize that just in the reading of the text, it can help with the development of a wholeness mindset. So this is really important for us to know as integral writers. Read other integral writers to see, and it helps us to develop our ability to think in this way. So let's get practical here. There's a few ideas, and I've created this in a handout that I will email to Bet and ask her to send it out to whoever would want it. As I said, we want to read and learn from other authors who write in a non-dual style: Byron Katie, Eckhart Tolle, Michael Brown, David Hawkins. Here's one: practice writing a story about yourself without using the pronoun I. Now, he would say things like, anger was arising. There's a way to write instead of I was angry. But so anyway, play around with that and see how it is. Also, practice thinking from a wholeness perspective and ignite your creativity by writing about a paradox. So for instance, write about a place that is both safe and dangerous, or a person who is forgiving and resentful. And there's a book called Prompt Paradox Journal, written by Story Spark Publishing, that has a whole bunch of prompts exactly like this to choose from. So, and that's, I've listed that in this handout. You can see if that's something you want to look at. Then use metaphor to help access a deeper understanding. Interrogate the metaphor. Follow it back from metaphor to reality, as Picasso teaches. Then when dealing with a polarity, get clear on the upsides of each pole and the downsides, and how can both upsides be leveraged. Discover where you may be over-functioning on one side to the detriment of the other. Then a big one here is to be mindful of language that reinforces our culture's mistaken belief in separation. I mean, notice separation metaphors in the business world. We capture the market share, we have a target audience, we rally the troops, we execute strategies, we have divisions within the company. It's all throughout our languaging. And so we want to get clear on that and be mindful of the languaging we're using. Acknowledge and integrate polarities you find within yourself to stop projecting exiled parts of yourself onto the other and creating more polarization. That's our ongoing work, really, is to be doing that. Then you can argue for each side of the polarity. Act as if you're having a debate with someone. Argue forcefully for one side, convince us why procrastination is the correct way, and then do the same for the opposing viewpoint. Tell us why incubation is the best. And as we do that, as we create a field within which all is welcome, you see, it sets the scene to be able to witness the synthesis that is attempting to emerge rather than over-focusing only on either pole. And when we can see and feel into opposing ideas at mental and emotional levels, we actually cross a threshold of consciousness where we can embrace what is, where we can experience it as our highest education. Everything that happens, we take it out of the realm of polarity and into the realm of higher education for ourselves, becoming the change that we're seeking in the world. I apologize. I know I kind of go overboard with these.
Oh my gosh, Jane, if I could give you I will give you a standing ovation. That was honestly excellent, excellent, excellent.
Thank you so much.
That was so good.
Well, what I love is learning about this stuff myself. Like, it's like, oh. And I had another thing I was going to share with you if there was time, but I feel like I've probably taken up all there's time. But I will tell you what it is so you can get an idea of this. I read about this. Someone was at a Jewish wedding, saw this being done, and then created their own kind of version of it. And what was happening was the rabbi invited the couple to look into each other's eyes, and that he was going to name, it's called the Seeing of the 70. And he was going to name the different faces that they would be showing the world. And that the couple, as each face was being mentioned, that the couple would silently marry that face, right?
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And so then he asked everyone who was there witnessing if they were there with their partner. He invited them to look at each other and kind of do this too. And if people were there without a partner, to do it internally, embracing these parts of their self that they maybe have rejected. And so I created a sort of a meditation that I've shared with people where we go through and we say yes to the angry face and the loving face and it's all the polarities. And so when we can do that kind of work, embracing these parts that we might be trying to hide or push away or repress, it's helping us to gain that wholeness mindset in a greater way. But anyway, I'd be happy to send you a copy of that meditation if anybody wants it too. Yeah.
I do. I want it.
Great. Oh, okay. So I'd love to hear what how it was to doing the, attention to the front, attention to the back. You can also do side to side. I've done that with some people that I'm working with on this, trying to get all four, and you actually kind of center it's like becoming very present that this is where you are as your attention is in all those places. So how was that for you?
Yeah, super interesting. Go ahead.
Go ahead, William.
Yeah, it was, I found it interesting when I attempted to look behind me. I felt I could see everything except what was immediately behind my head, because I wasn't able to look through my head.
Right.
But
Yes.
that was the case looking forward.
Yes. Now, see, doing this on a computer, the reason I asked you to close your eyes is because it's really easy to see what's behind you. And right. And so when we did this, like we did this in person in a room, and everybody couldn't turn your head, right? You just looked Now you could look forward, but then back and side, it was just moving your sensory awareness farther out, you know. And if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza's work, any of his work, where he has you feel the space around you, like you're moving your attention beyond the body, and I've always had a hell of a time doing that. You know, I
Mhm.
try all the time, but until one time he had us, you know, where you can rub your hands together and then you can sort of feel this ball of energy. And then he
Mhm.
said, feel the space between your hands. And it was like, oh, okay, now I can do that, you know. And so it's learning how to sense beyond the body, the
Yeah.
wholeness, right? Yeah. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, yeah, the wall in front and the wall behind. I have a very visual imagination. That's my nature. So it was easy for me with my eyes shut to put my attention forward on the wall in front, put it behind me on the wall behind me, which we can see in the screen. And it wasn't being aware of any particular piece, just the solidity of a wall. And then when you suggested we be aware of both, the sense was of the space of the room, a very I don't know, visceral is too strong a word, but it was a very embodied sense of the space between the walls.
Mm,
It just
Yes.
it was not something I was trying for. That was the experience as it presented itself.
mm,
Yes. Yeah. It's a different way of
yeah.
sensing. Yeah, Roshani?
Yeah, I had the feeling when I was looking behind that maybe that's what it's like when people who say they have eyes behind their head, that I could actually sort of feel a little energy at the back of my
Yes.
head trying to look through. And I wondered, could I develop that skill and actually see what was behind me? And behind me is not much at all on the walls or anything. So, yeah, I was feeling that solidity. And then when it was both, I felt as though I had a sort of a band of energy around my head, sort
Mm,
of feeling both sides. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
mm,
I find myself actually physically moving
Mm.
back and forth, and
yeah.
sensing that,
Excuse me, I
yeah,
wonder if
go
this
ahead.
is what Eckhart Tolle means by becoming aware of the quote inner body, unquote, which is a subtle energy
Mm.
body.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a point, there was something I was going to do, and I just thought I was doing too much, but let me just share this with
Aren't
you.
we all?
Uh, um, when we're looking at our individuality and our interbeingness, right?
Mhm.
Um, so you can sort of imagine your body. There are 40 trillion cells within your body, 2 billion of them within your heart. And so
Mm.
feel the heart's energy field. Let that grow and expand and start to
Mhm.
feel the energy within your body. In fact, information, I love this, is zooming right now through your nervous system at 250 miles per hour. I don't know how many kilometers that is, William. I'm out of touch with that. But you start to get this sense of what's happening inside the body. And if you can kind of feel yourself contained within the
Mhm.
skin, all that's happening, it's a whole world in there, right? And
Mm,
Right.
then feel that distinctive aliveness now, being nested within the infinite. And so it's
Mm.
those two things of really getting clear on feeling your own energy, your own aliveness. You know, Ernest Holmes and Centers for Spiritual Living, he calls us thinking centers in divine mind. And so I really like
ooh,
Mm.
that. It's like
ooh,
we're energy patterns within the allness. And so when we can start to experience that, right? Like we experience what our aliveness feels like, but then we can get into being, um, enfolded in life itself.
yes.
And so,
Mhm.
anyway, I thought, okay, I'm not going to push that right now, but it just felt, I think those are the kinds of things we want to do, um, just as a matter of learning how to live integrally, in a sense. They're skill
Yeah.
sets that I haven't developed, I'll speak for myself. And
I,
the more I can do that, the more I experience life. Yeah, go ahead, William.
Yeah, just a question for you, Jane. I'm
Yeah.
wondering when you're doing the polarity of the known and the unknown, do you find yourself that you're like doing automatic writing at all, or do you ever have a sense of channeling at all?
No, I wish I did. I tried, I'm determined. I think that my problem, I've come to realize that my left brain just shuts everything off for me. I can't be hypnotized. I've tried hypnosis. I can't. Everybody else is going under, not me. And so I've just kind of let that go. But I do, the morning pages. You ever done those with,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
when I do that, surprising things can come out. Not always, but sometimes, and often enough that it's like the unknown inserts itself. All of a sudden, something emerges that I wasn't expecting, and so that does happen. But you know, psychic.
Yeah.
I took a course once to increase psychic powers, and I was like the only one in the classroom. I was like, can't do it.
Yeah.
Everybody else can. And it was that belief that stopped anything from happening, of course, right?
Well, maybe that's just not what you're here to do in this life. You're here to do other things.
That's what I've come to, the same realization.
Yeah, I'm sure that's all real. It's funny. I'm empathic and intuitive, but I'm not psychic.
See, I'm the
And,
same.
and
Yeah,
it's
that's a
just like
great way.
that's just yeah. And my skill set is in other directions. But I know I've done those 3 pages in the morning. Maybe not perfectly, but I had the book. And for me, when I am doing truly creative writing, where I'm generating something completely new, I need to be doing that. Where it's the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up. It's like a dream journal. And you can certainly include dreams if you have one, but it's just the first thing you do is you write 3 pages. You do not edit as you go. You just whatever comes out, blap, that's what goes on the page. And somehow, for my way of explaining it to myself, is that kind of opens portals between the conscious and the unconscious parts of my personality. The deep, William and I were we in an earlier webinar today, the extra conscious, the parts of our personality that are not in our waking awareness. That's actually the vast majority, even of our individual personalities. But there's an osmosis between the two. And what that morning writing does is it helps open the pores, as it were. So things that are extra conscious can float through into our waking awareness. And I think, I can do technical writing to a specific purpose, no problem. But if I'm going to do really creative writing, for fiction, I need to open the pores in between the membranes, the liminal space, whatever you want to call it, that I need a practice like that so that to get it started flowing through
I
for
love that.
deeply
Open
creative
the
things.
pores. Yes.
Open the pores. Yeah.
Yeah. Because once the flow starts, it can
Yeah.
just keep going.
Oh
It's
yeah,
getting the
it can be,
blockages out of the way.
but it can be like a river in spate too, and that's another that's a problem. That's a good problem to have. Those are the problems of success.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a little curious about the eye of the eye. I didn't
Mm.
quite understand what you meant by now. It makes total sense that the word I was not in it. So how did you come to
Well,
that understanding?
I wouldn't say it made total sense, but I can read it. It doesn't seem foreign now
Ah,
when I read it. That's the
Mm-hmm.
difference. It's like, I wonder why I thought this was so weird. That's how because I
Okay.
got that book out when I was preparing for this. I went, oh, I remember that book, how weird it was. I'm going to take another look. I'm reading it going, oh, yeah. I mean, it's
Oh,
just written
gotcha.
from an integral perspective.
Mm.
And yeah, it's a great book. But I got to reread this sucker.
Yeah,
that would be an interesting experiment to take a piece of something I've written that talks about I and then rewrite it
Yeah.
without the I, but say exactly the same things. That would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Now he does use we, I noticed. So that's one way to, but anyway, he's alluding to our interconnection in a sense as well, right?
Yeah. How did he say you? Do you remember very often?
You know, I don't know. I don't remember. I'm going to have to look that up
Yeah,
because
because this is something I've recently become very sensitive to, how often, especially kind of books where people are sharing their wisdom with the greater world. You this, and you'll find this, and you'll see this. And I've started to bristle at it a bit. And I prefer what you were just saying, the eye of the eye, where we will generally find, or often we will find. It's not like I'm gonna. It's like subtle colonialism. Like, I know better than you. Like, I'm invading your space and I'm taking over and I'm telling you what you should do. I've started to get to get. It's like I've started to get a little allergic to it.
yeah, I know what you mean. I agree.
Well, I do editing work a little bit for Sunrise Ranch, a retreat and conference center in Colorado. And one of my assignments now is to go through the whole website and look for we, our, and us language and get rid of it. Because the idea is that we're saying we at Sunrise Ranch are like this, and our buildings and our classes and our this is off-putting to people. Because they are part of us. They just haven't arrived yet. And so I'm rewriting these sentences. And of course, the easiest thing is to just make it all passive, you know.
Yeah, that's
and
worse.
to me, it feels institutional, because now I'm saying Sunrise Ranch is blah 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 a lot instead of we are. But that's what they want. And so for the most part, I do it, and then sometimes I just go, that is way too passive, and I have to ask ChatGPT to help me.
That's a good idea. Yes.
Here's a paragraph. How would you say it?
Yeah, I was
then,
going to say, what on earth would you replace it with?
Yeah, well,
Passive
a
voices.
lot of it is passive. And then, but I try to be creative I don't know. I'm just trying my best.
Wow. Well, there's your
That's the assignment.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'd be open to leaving a few in here and there, but anyway, that's.
Yeah, give them several options and see which they prefer. I think that may be an undoable assignment. Wow. I'm going to chew on that.
Well, I had a page today that's talking about a certain kind of, say, energy medicine. And so to me, or no, it wasn't, it was about, it was the creative field, about their creative field program. But when they were saying we, I thought in this case, I think they're talking about we as humans. And I'm like, somebody else should be editing this, not the part-time contractor. I want the guy who wrote it to go over it and make sure he's saying what he wants to say, and me not just taking stuff out. So
yeah, that's wise for sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. William, what kind of things are you writing?
I'm currently writing a book about integral purpose.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is it evolutionary purpose?
Excuse me?
Is it evolutionary purpose?
As a matter of fact, that's one of the tenets of purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting initiative. And I think I'm breaking some new ground here, because purpose in life is actually a higher order construct, psychological construct, and it embraces numerous types of lines of development or multiple intelligences. And so I've come up with a new idea of having a meta line of development. So, for example, purpose in life, I think it's a meta line of development that actually includes the cognitive, the moral, the aesthetic, et cetera, whatever your makeup is in creating purpose in life. So that's one
awesome
thing, So sort of
Yep.
new idea that's going to be part of this.
One of the things that we talk about in our course is the difference between mission and purpose, and that a mission means different things to different people on the spiral. If you're talking about the spiral, that it could mean, taking the hill or taking over, that kind of stuff. And whereas purpose is, as you say, it's the integral aspect of being the change that you want to see in the world, like being.
Yes, yeah, it's the aspirational long-term directions that you never
like that.
actually achieve, because if you do achieve, it's not really a purpose, it's a goal.
Mm.
Well, we have reached the end of our time together.
We have.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop the recording.